Today's talk focuses on two areas. The first is that Bob Lutz made some comments on Autoline regarding the Model Y being terminally ugly, and that only those not buying Model 3s would be interested in purchasing it. The second thing we take a look at today is Neil de Grasse Tyson, the famed astronomer, decided to give up his Audi in favor of a Model X. So we kind of take a look at why it is there are a lot of wealthy folks like Dr. Tyson giving up high-end European cars to embrace the Model X and other electric vehicles. And then we further have our follow-up on sort of our coverage of stock and its impact. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is the first time on the channel, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. Wanted to note to you that we're on the East Coast of the United States and fall is coming in. And one of the goals I had in mind was to try to pick up some of the fall colors. And so we were able to find some trees at Catholic University that really represented, some really good fall foliage. And we appreciate your indulgence sound-wise relative to the environment we're in, but you can't argue about how beautiful the trees are behind me, and that color will disappear in a couple of days as we get more rain, and as you can see, those leaves are starting to fall. I want to also thank our Patreon supporters as well as our subscribers. If you like our show, we'd appreciate your taking time to like and subscribe, and if possible, supporting Patreon would be appreciated. Our Patreon has all levels of support, so if you can afford $1 fine, $5, $10, whatever it is, would be greatly appreciated. So I decided we have an ongoing series in which Bob Lutz sort of shares his thoughts on Tesla and Tesla's possibilities. And I was impressed by the paradox of an article that was picked up by Teslafaninsight, and this is all based on a conversation that we had earlier about the fact that Elon Musk pointed out that the Model Y will eventually be Tesla's top-selling vehicle and will likely outsell every vehicle made by Tesla combined in terms of routine numbers. So I found this fascinating in terms of a paradox, because on one hand, Elon Musk is anticipating the Model Y being the best seller of all time for Tesla, despite selling whatever 400,000 or a total probably of 800,000 other vehicles. And at the same time, former GM exec Mr. Lutz is concluding that it's a terminally ugly vehicle that nobody will want to buy. So we thought it was kind of fun to sort of go through the paradox between these two and sort of make a few comments. So one of the things that I found interesting, first off, is the fact that how a vehicle looks in the wind tunnel is very different than how it looks in reality. So one of the discussions we've had extensively is the fact that the design of Tesla's vehicles allow them to get rid of the grille and now deliver a vehicle that's wind tunnel optimized. So an example of how this plays out is that while the Model X is getting 328 miles on a 100 gig battery or kilowatt hour battery, a 95 kilowatt hour battery from Audi is getting 204 miles in the e-tron. So yes, in fact, one could say that the e-tron probably looks better. Part of it is the metal grille in front, and Tesla actually tried the metal grille effect initially to adjust to consumer taste, but eventually got rid of it because it's not necessary in any kind of engine cooling process. And so what we've traditionally grown to know and love in terms of defining elements of SUVs, for example, the grille and how you can play around with the design of that to create a look for a vehicle that's defined automobiles globally for 100 years is no longer needed for obvious reasons. The motors are in the wheels, so there's no need to have any kind of a cooling entity in the front of the car. So the bottom line of that conclusion is just the fact that how the wind views the way the vehicle looks is very different than how we might view it. And the wind thinks that you're getting a lot of extra range in that process. There are many other elements of how this plays out. For example, there are other elements that impact how the vehicle looks. So for example, many of the tech workers in our area get free charging at their companies. And so when you eliminate a bill to pay for fuel, the vehicle looks slightly better. Another one would be the pollution impact on society by using electricity instead of ice or fuel. Also adds to the, I want to say, the look of the vehicle. Looks a lot better. You also have things like with the reduced number of parts in the vehicle, vehicle repairs short and long term end up doing fewer because there are literally just fewer parts that need to be replaced or repaired over time. So as you can see, we're adding up a number of elements of the Model 3 that articulate, or Model 3, Model Y, and Model X that articulate how and why it works. It was interesting because as I first looked at the Model Y, I was thinking to myself, man, it just looks like a Model 3 with a hatchback, which is true. Another element of the beauty that we haven't been able to present to you that we'd like to encourage you to check out, particularly if you have a Model 3, is when it's raining, if you drive next to the car and watch the flow of water off the car. I think it's fascinating because it truly is optimized to be a sort of a best practices, and I think that I think it definitely handles its aerodynamic responsibilities well, and extrapolating that to the Model Y and then to the Model X, I think is brilliant. We've also talked about the fact that SUVs are dominant right now because as real estate prices rise, there's this phenomenon of the fact that most people need to have one car represent a bunch of different solutions. So 59% of all SUVs or vehicles sold are SUVs, and hence why Elon Musk believes that the Model Y will outsell everything, and we are inclined to agree with him. The next thing, so bottom line is that based on what previous assessments of beauty have been, we could actually go and appreciate and embrace Mr. Lutz's analysis of the fact that, it may not be the greatest looking car, but there are many elements of how those looks are derived and why that, add up to a good looking car, maybe a great car, once you start to enjoy some of the benefits from it that either ICE vehicles or competing vehicles are unable to achieve. The next item that we have on our list today is there's a famous scientist, Dr. Neil de Grasse Tyson, and he announced recently that he had acquired a Model X. So we thought this was good news and hence decided to include it in our show today. A few notes on this came to mind. My preference actually was we actually wanted to use Fat Joe as our sort of nom de plume because Fat Joe is a famous rapper, and 60 Minutes had a show on him, or an interview with him, in which I guess his wife had to pull his Ferrari out because for a man his size, he loves Ferrari and the beauty of the lines, but he can't get in the car. So he has other people drive it around so he can enjoy looking at it. but he has to ride in pickup trucks of different types based on the fact that he's about 6'4", 250 plus, and that just doesn't go well with Ferraris. So in the case of Neil de Grasse Tyson, we had 4 or 5 observations about his decision to move over to a Model X. The first of them is something I call big man syndrome. So it turns out that most of the attributes of beautiful cars, low to the ground, low wind resistance, in essence, a race car, make it difficult for people of size, i.e. 6 foot plus, etc., to comfortably get in and out of the car and enjoy the many attributes of the vehicle. Dr. Tyson indicated that the Model X that he chose was actually fairly expensive, so we suspect that he actually went for the performance version of the X, which is a highline model, but it has all the great features in it. And one of them I wanted to highlight for big men that I really enjoy is the fact that you can actually have the car elevate to its highest suspension level and set up in a way to allow a bigger driver to enter the vehicle almost from standing up. So if you have back issues, etc., it's an excellent choice. Usually there aren't any biohazard needs of people in the greater New York City area where he's based, but there's also the issue of, if there are pollution issues, you could simply put the biohazard mode on, which is only available in the X and the S. Another issue is that New York City, particularly Manhattan's real estate, is extremely expensive. So as a result, the number of gas stations is slim to none, and being able to simply plug in the garage that you're parked in and charge up that way or do a supercharger is a major league improvement on how city dwellers of that type are forced to live. Dr. Tyson has a personal relationship with Elon Musk, so another reason I'm impressed for his transition. The fourth reason we have listed is Dr. Tyson is a planet guy, so a lot of his work relates to how to maintain a healthy planet and grow that, and having him transition to an electric vehicle, I think, is consistent with all of the objectives he talks about in terms of delivering to the planet a healthy process. I was intrigued because he also pointed out the X was kind of pricey, and clearly you can start at the 75D level and roll all the way up, but at his level of income, I think it's worthwhile to make that transition. Another sort of variable we believe for vehicles like the Model X is age and height issues. So there's actually a designer named Tommy Hilfiger, and he recently sold his Enzo Ferrari, a very limited edition vehicle with 3,000 miles on it, for someplace in that $2.5 million range. And what he pointed out was, and I believe he's about 5'7", 5'8", that he in essence couldn't deal with having to try to get in the car anymore, so hence he decided to sell it. And so I just think it's fascinating because as you age, the ability to sort of duck down into very low slung vehicles becomes difficult. And it's exciting to note that as you make the transition to a Model X at the top end of the performance curve, you're delivering performance numbers as good, if not better, than most of the Ferraris and high performance vehicles, but without all the painful headaches. So when we make the comment about the big man syndrome, a lot of the big men like a Dr. Tyson or Fat Joe have been stuck in this position where the low slung vehicles that everyone wants to be in because of the type of both performance, speed, etc. that you would get is completely it's a totally different proposition. So hats off to Dr. Tyson for his transition, as well as his support of Elon Musk's genius and willingness to take on naysayers. We think that it's great to see him make that transition, and it's a further feather in the cap of Tesla and Elon Musk to have folks at his caliber moving over. It also should be noteworthy that instead of simply going over to the e-tron that's at his facility. He actually elected to go ahead and switch manufacturers to the Model X. And this further highlights the fact that while the big auto companies in Europe seem to have, the luxury line customers on lockdown, there are a lot of those customers that are transitioning to Tesla, even as those companies are starting to introduce products, because the overall solution is so much a better one. So we just thought this whole collection of issues was an interesting one. The final item we wanted to sort of dabble in today is the fact that the stock kind of sat in the negative position for much of the weekend, and as we started the week, Tesla stock price is up, and we're expecting somewhere between a 10 and 20% rise. We're expecting a 10 to 20% rise in the stock price over the next couple of weeks, and we'll look forward to reporting that as it occurs. There's one last thing that we've been sort of playing around with that, we had a question pop up, and the question focused on profitability going forward. There's something strange happening on the profitability of China, which is Elon Musk talked about the cost inputs being half what they are in the US for the Chinese plant. And then as he announced earnings, he indicated that the numbers were comparable. We won't know what those true numbers are until the next round of earnings, and it's articulated how many vehicles were sold in China and how that hits the both revenue and profit line. But we kind of disagree. We really think that China is kind of a fulcrum, and it's going to be the source of a lot of success for Tesla and profitability based on better margins that will really drive the company successfully into the future. So we agree it will be a real boon to the company. We've been having a conversation with one of our viewers about the fact that there was some question or doubt about, well, if Elon is not there, does this jeopardize the potential future success of Tesla? And what's really interesting about that question is that Elon kind of weighed in on this issue during a 60 Minutes interview perhaps a year ago. And what he said was that he kind of likes not being at the factory all the time. And the main reason is that he's a perfectionist, and he has an inclination to allow his perfectionism to influence decisions that are being made that could be extremely costly to the company, but not add a lot of value, etc. So what I find interesting is that Elon is half-time at Tesla right now and then focused on SpaceX and the other businesses that he has running. And what we were fascinated by is that he recognized that his presence there can be a disruption. So when Elon's not there, from what we've learned about, there are a lot of people that don't get fired when he's there, because sometimes if he's angry, he'll literally just fire someone. Another phenomenon of Elon is that as many senior executives have been quitting recently, they've been replaced by relatively inexperienced folks. For example, the CFO is 4 or 5 years out of business school. And so it's an interesting circumstance, because the bottom line is that having Elon there for strategic vision and helping guide globally what the company is doing has worked out well. There are a lot of young, really sharp people that have been hired, and as you don't have senior managers, even including Elon, micromanaging them, they can be free to sort of implement the vision that he has in mind unencumbered. So it's our assessment that if in fact Elon, wasn't around for some reason or around extensively, the company has sort of reached a plateau where it's really time for long-term, well-trained managers to sort of roll in and apply their logic to the success of the firm going forward. So we actually kind of look forward to Elon not being around as much, because We think that it'll improve profitability. It'll allow management to get more stable versus them getting fired all the time. And you're also running some challenges where when you hire world-class executives that are well regarded across the globe, for example, the Apple executive that was running autonomous that was fired was immediately hired back by Apple. So these are brilliant people. They're in demand elsewhere. And by having them fired all the time, it really doesn't help really smart people to want to take on the challenge of being at Tesla and making a difference there. So, that's our general assessment of that. Now, I have to admit that we're at about 20 minutes right now. We typically do Q&A at this point. I saw Mr. Boateng there. I saw a number of you have said hello, and I've deliberately been avoiding reading your comments, and the goal being to make sure that we stay true to the original subject covered. So what I think we're actually going to do is we're going to field all the questions that were posed. What we're going to do is copy the question that you posed, paste it into the notes under the show, and then I can do an answer from there and allow others to weigh in on those topics as well. So that's a solution that I think might work. And feel free to, as I'm closing out the show, if you have any final questions that you'd like to ask, I'd be happy to answer while still in show mode. So the health notes that we have for today focus on the fact that I actually met with a kidney doctor, and one of the things he pointed out is that when it comes to fried foods, no more than once a week. The reason is that your body will look at the fried foods and say, oh, I don't know what this is. Why don't I store it next to your organs? And this can be part of the process of type 2 diabetes development. So just wanted to note this to you guys as something to consider. Just a reminder, 25 leg lifts a day on each leg help prevent knee issues, strengthens the quad muscles, and it also helps promote general health throughout your body without necessarily having to go to the gym. And then, as usual, we always mention don't go to bed within 4 hours of eating, preferably, but at least 2 hours to allow the food to digest to some extent to avoid acid indigestion or acid reflux issues. This is a reminder. Please take time to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the show. We look forward to our next show. We have a couple of shows that are coming up regarding Daimler-Benz, Mercedes, as well as BMW, and how and why they're moving in the electric space, particularly as Tesla is growing dramatically into the environment. At any rate, this is great for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. In German, we say, Begeist versteht noch immer ausfahrbeinen. Tschüss. Au revoir, French. Lahit Road, Hebrew, Hoda, Hafez, Farsi, Hejdu, Swedish, Srazvice, Russian, Ni hao ma, Chinese, and in Jamaica we say, Nof respect wa goodman. Thanks once again for joining us on our Fall Colors tour here. It is definitely a beautiful time of the year, and we always look forward to the colors, and it's a thrill to get them integrated into the show to some extent. Have a great day. Bye for now, and please take time to like and subscribe.